This is Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Charney Kaye, artist, musician, hacker, founder of xjmusic.com. And welcome to the Fan Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, Phantom. Good to meet you. Great to be here.
Want to let people know that we are a featured podcast on Newsly. You can see the icon up there. And for those of you who are listening, if you use coupon code GHOST, you can check that out for free for 30 days. And we will be on Newsly. We are a featured podcast. We'll be on there later tonight. But I do want to thank you for being on the show. We're actually at episode 1028, tracking on Apple Podcasts since 2016. And today we're talking to the founder of XJ Music. We're going to get into that discussion. And maybe you can give a brief background of tell your story before we dive into XJ Music.
Sure. So I'm from Chicago originally. I grew up, I was just taking apart electronics and programming computers, since I was a kid, and actually started off dealing with bulletin board systems, just hacking random things and phone freaking before getting into the internet and, the web. I never really thought that I'd be a professional software developer. Like, that wasn't in my mind. I always wanted to be an artist, a musician. Grew up playing music and piano actually for a while there. And then I got into electronic music production, and specifically this lane called tracking, which was part of the demo scene, back, can we go back to the 90s, and made an entire album, with a tracker. Then eventually got into DJing and got some Akai MPC 2000s and was working with that. But a lot of my friends, at that time when I graduated high school, we were all musicians, and a few of them ended up becoming professional musicians, just sticking with it over the years. And I think that's incredibly impressive, putting in that like 4 hours a day, just every day. And, and I still just envy their ability to get on stage and play together. I ended up actually going to film school and, continuing to pursue art, and it just turned into a lot of different things in advertising, and did art direction, and kind of eventually it was like a lot of web stuff, even building flash banners, if you remember that.
Yeah.
And at a certain point I realized, okay, if I'm going to be doing software professionally, then I want to learn how to do that right. Went to a lot of hackathons, never had a computer science background officially. Just taught myself a lot of stuff and did a lot of learning on the job. So, fast forward, I've had a lot of different jobs as a professional software developer, and even kind of went all the way into doing back-end development and realized like that's not exactly right. So my day job now, I actually work for Endeavor, building mobile apps for big events, and it's cool. It's a good balance of just my passion for art and creativity, and really like human-centered design, building things that are going to have some meaning to people, like, walking around an event, actually using them in their lives. And then the technical side of it.
That's interesting because I'm a software guy, but I'm a what you call a business system analyst. Been in the financial services and insurance industry for 25 years.
Yeah.
That's my day job. That's how I afford my Mogs.
Yeah, I know about this.
And then it just kept on playing since I was 17, and I just created this, my brand, Phantom Electric Ghost, and I create electronic music. I kind of do it from the standpoint of like I like bands like Funkadelic, Yes, Genesis, like Peter Gabriel, Genesis. So I'm a kind of guy, like, I want to know what Keith Emerson was using. I want to know what Rick Wakeman was using, and then I try to get it and use it. So I'm into progressive rock, art rock, kind of, sound design, Brian Eno, that kind of stuff.
Wow.
But my day job helps me afford it, so I'm able to be creative. But it's, I'm doing finance, so that's not what you're doing in software. It's kind of, it's a bunch of actuaries telling me what the formulas are.
Yeah, I actually had a foray in the middle of kind of like getting into just back-end software development, and I spent a couple of years at a venture capital firm, like building just back-end, it was a platform that analysts were using to look at deals. So that might be similar.
Yeah, that kind of thing, like annuities and like, figuring out cash value, death tables, all that stuff. But
Yeah.
you get into the world of like art, you know, I've always been I found the software design helped me do still be creative because I still have to build
Yeah.
stuff that may not exist. It might not be as cool
Right.
as working with my Moog and figuring out the CV to create a new waveform.
Mhm.
But it still keeps my mind going in a different way. So then I can kind of apply that thinking
Yeah.
to how I record. It's interesting. You're talking about MPCs. I've got like an Akai Force, and
Okay.
I want to understand. I was looking at XJ Music, and it looks like it's like a generative music platform. It seems like kind of like the Grid, kind of like what I see
Mhm.
on my Akai Force, but you're creating like these like a soft synth in a way. But you've got this interesting models. I didn't dive into it too far, but maybe you can talk about like you said, it's kind of for people who are musicians already.
Right.
So I guess one question being the kind of musician I am and is, you know, where I am is it, does it use an audio interface and you can connect a MIDI keyboard or you just stay within your XJ music to do everything?
Right. So probably I think where it diverges from your process when we were talking, just earlier, tracking like directly into 4 tracks, and I really appreciate that live and like performance focused style. And where we picked up is basically after you've produced stems, and that's like
Oh, something.
specifically
Oh, I
y-
see. Yeah.
right, like you could take that out of a 4 track. Usually the term means like it's gone through some mastering process, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have just the final layers, right, that you're going to sum up into the music.
Yeah. You mastered your layer into a WAV file or MP3 and you can bring it in as a
Right,
stem or a file, however you want to bring it in.
right. And for video game music in particular, which has really become our central focus, we could definitely also do really cool music for live streams and also for environments. But you're starting with somebody, a composer, producer has come up with an idea for a musical composition, and it's something that's going to be essentially never ending, right?
Oh, it
But
goes on a loop, like, or it's more than a loop.
right, it's more than a loop is a great way to put it, where, as a starting point, if you look at video games now, you see a lot of loops, and, even just down to having to calculate, like, exactly where that loop starts based on
Or
the beat per
it's
minute.
syncing it to the game like a filmmaker syncs the
Yeah,
soundtrack.
and then and
You
they
gotta
hack
do
it
that
together.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So we really started, from the groundwork of coming up with a system, like, and I actually have a patent for the mathematical system. It's not super complicated. It's more like a logical framework to, like, actually just represent music, in
Mhm.
this way so it can be played back dynamically.
That's awesome. So it helps you do that piece, like, if, you know, if you're a composer and you're working with a TV commercial or you're working with a film and you kinda got it in front of you
Right.
and you're trying to synchronize it in your DAW or on your mastering board with all your tools to, like, sync up that piece of music to that scene, you know,
And
and I guess in video games, you gotta sync it to whatever sequence
right,
that's happening, you know, in the game. You know, if you're with some kind of open world game, it's gonna trigger that music based on a certain
exactly.
situation. And if once you hit the boss battle,
Yep.
the other ominous music because something's getting ready to happen.
Yeah, you got it, exactly. If it's just a commercial, you don't necessarily need what we've built because you have all the control in the world. But the moment that you get into situations like video games, live streams, environments where you don't know ahead of time what's going to happen, then you trigger our playback engine with these kinds of, events that are about like what is happening generally, and it's going to pick the stems. It's going to choose from all the pieces that you've got, and also it's not going to sound the same every time. You really
Oh,
have
it
a lot of.
changes it up. It
Yeah,
changes it. So you can have a lot of stems in a library, and it randomizes based on some kind of algorithm where they're going to happen.
exactly.
Well, that's cool. That's a cool thing. Yeah, that's
Thank
interesting. Because, like, I think it's like, so is it kind of meant for somebody, like you're saying, the composers already have pieces of music and then they're gonna bring them into this environment to be able to use it for this purpose?
right, right. And we there's a lot of sort of tools and like generative stuff out there now which advertises, you basically like press a button, get music. It's going to generate automatically,
Yeah.
right? And that's not what we're doing. And especially I think if you're sort of like larger video games that are really investing in music production, or even if you're a major artist or just anybody that's taking your music on tour, or designing the sound for a museum space or something, like situations where people really care about representing their original intention, you
Mhm.
know, like traditional, you know, music in a way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, with the AI, it's like, okay, yeah, find me something that sounds like
Right.
Miles Davis. Find me
Right.
something that sounds like Sun Ra. Do a prompt, and then you get something, right? And that's fine. But I'm kind of like, I have a vision. Like I know what I
Mm.
want. I'm an experimental musician.
Hmm.
I know exactly what I'm trying to do,
Yeah.
and
Very
I
cool.
don't need, maybe if I have a tool that helps me with my mastering, say, hey, what happens if I make this sound like bitches brews mix. And if
Uh,
you had a system that could figure out what that mix what the board had set for the compressors and all that stuff, that's cool. I
mm,
could use something like that. But still,
uh,
I might want to just play with those compressors and stuff myself
right.
because I can tend to kind of like know how I want to shape it because I'm a sound designer. So
Right.
I spend 3 hours on my Moog trying to create waveforms to create new tones.
Right.
So like if I'm into that level of detail, I'm probably going to figure out what kind of compression I want or not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you know, we really believe, I believe, and the whole team that we've got together, that music is human. That at some level, this is an expression of a person's point of view, like their subjective reality and what they want to get out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I still have a tool that understands the human factor. And
Mm,
there's so many things today where they're trying to take the human factor out.
yeah.
It started with like sampling, and then people
Mm,
could add it, and it still becomes a human issue though, because like if you go back to the old hip hop and
mm,
people are using vinyl, and then people
mhm.
are syncing up to 808s or 909s. There's still a lot of they're using machines, but there's still a lot of human being just making decisions and
Yeah,
how these machines are going to get into this. They're using them as tools, and
yeah,
now sometimes people are just taking it so I can do the whole thing without having any kind of like human element, like the human element of the happy accident or
yeah,
the human
yeah,
element of maybe not trying to make it perfect. So they're
absolutely.
thinking about like Exile on Main Street or a band like Yes or Genesis
Mm.
and doing key changes, making happy accidents and going with that. Oh, it's a bad note. No, it's an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, it's oh man, it's true. And actually a word that an artist that we interviewed recently brought up, nuance, you know, like
Yeah.
that that's where you really feel the humanity in recorded music.
Well, yeah, it's the micro timing. Like you can see the BPM telling you to stay in the BPM. But a
Mm,
lot of great music is the micro timing and the tonal quality of like getting into a little dissonance. I mean, we spend a lot of time with our oscillators
mm,
getting them to drift or getting them to
mm,
like be a little bit out of sync. Like I have multiple oscillators and tune them differently. So
mm.
they're not all perfect.
That's
They're
cool.
actually
Yeah.
imperfect because that imperfectness gives you like very unique tonal qualities to having
Yeah.
it be a little off. And there's some people who are so like, I got to get it right in tune. I'm like, why? Why not have it a little off?
Yeah, that's
You know?
because I mean, tuning as we know it, like that's just one subjective interpretation of what music can be. And you know, like pretty much almost all the music you're gonna see, you know, I don't know, in pop in the US is like sitting in this grid of 12 notes that have been
Yeah,
predetermined.
yeah.
And yeah, it gets sort of like tiring after a while. What the an artist Ian Hersey that we worked with that built out this musical composition, the project we call Space, and
Mhm.
you can see like some of the stuff on our YouTube, and we did some the foray into like what people call binaural beats,
Yeah,
and
those are awesome. Yeah,
he
it's
really
stereo. Those are like stereo, like
right,
fully stereo, like stereo oscillators from the start.
and a slight phasing, like you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
We got really into that, and it was just really important to us that like we had the system that could preserve that, you know, nuance.
But I think it's really important to get the character of what the artist is trying to convey.
Mhm.
And it's not that you want to match what's in the top 20 and
Right.
use the same sample pack, the same drum loop, the same just because that's what's hitting. And then you get
Yeah.
some producers replicating the same kind of drops, the same scenarios of multiple songs because it's familiar.
Yeah.
Where I'm kind of a guy that like when I listen to Lou Reed and the Velvets, I listen to Alex
Mhm.
Chilton and Big
Mhm.
Star, stuff that was kind of in the at the bottom of the bin.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Like,
they, I mean,
the Brian
yeah,
Eno experiments, that's the kind of stuff. It's like I want to hear something a little different. Um,
uh,
and if you can use tools to help you, like, kind of bend things, like if I could see how your tool works and then kind of be able to use, like, a lot of like Eurorack experimental
hmm,
music that's just like sound painting type stuff, and
yeah.
then figure out how I could take these sound paintings and organize them in a way that somebody could use. That'd be a cool experiment. I'm going to try it after this.
Right. Yeah, and I was checking out some of your music, on the website, and I really appreciate like just sort of avant-garde is like word that comes to mind too.
Yeah.
We got so much stuff on the radio is like sitting in the same
No.
form, right? And like even just the
Yeah.
idea of a song is this really rigid form, and
Yeah.
yeah, there's not much room to explore a lot of these ideas.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, if you take sometimes we take, random voltage generator and
Uh,
have a random voltage generator run my drum machine. I'll have like an
uh,
analog drum machine and then trigger it with like random voltage or LFOs or multiple LFOs that come in at different
uh,
points. And then it runs around and it keeps on running on a loop, but it keeps on changing
yeah,
every time. And so it
yeah,
sounds like a real person. Like, if you use a lot of analog stuff with these Euro racks, you
right.
can patch them together to create kind of this like virtual machine that's not like AI. It's like
Mm,
really old school 1960s, 70s tech
yeah.
that allows you to have a lot of bottom and a lot of like it just feels like very real. The analog stuff
Mhm.
feels less digital. And so I like to, but I get opportunities to kind of take digital tech and then take the analog and bring it in. So the analog's giving me
Yeah.
that sound I want, but maybe the tech, like your tech, might give me the opportunity to take that analog and then bring it in to a different realm.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing you just brought up there too, because in a way, when you're talking about connecting these analog electronic components together, and there is going to be like a kind of logic that creates, and you could look at it as a kind of algorithm, but it has a life to it that is
Yeah.
definitely gone once you really nail an algorithm down and you're running it digitally. Unless you deliberately introduce these other kinds of variants, like simulated synthesizers,
Hmm.
you don't get that kind of life to it.
Yeah, that's the thing I love about the randomness of like analog systems is like
Mm.
they warm up over time. Like my
Uh,
analog modes, like when they're cold, they behave differently than if they've been on for a half hour and they've
oh
been
wow.
on for like 2 hours and stuff. They start to drift. The
Mhm.
oscillators will drift. Things will get a little different every time you do something. You
Uh,
can just pitch it so different, like it's coming through in a very honest way. What's almost like
right.
another person. Like, say, I call that's why I call myself Fan Electric Ghost, because the ghosts are kind of playing with me. The ghost
Interesting.
in the
Yeah,
machine.
yeah, no, yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
idea, is the ghost in the machine is actually these are my partners in crime or my sense.
Yeah,
They do have the life of their own.
uh,
Um, but it's interesting because the methods that you use in your digital product, maybe you can kind of explain like the methodology of trying, like, what XJ music, like how does your algorithm, maybe the base of it, or maybe you have multiple algorithms,
alright.
but like the whole concept of how you put songs together in your system. Like, what
Yeah,
does somebody do when they start to track it? Like, I know that we live in a grid life world where people say, "Oh, I'm going to take a lane on my grid on my MPC, and I'm going to start, putting them in the grid and figure out where they're going to go." But maybe you can talk about what is that workflow.
sure. Yeah, and right now, this whole process, like, we've got a pretty, mature, like, desktop player, like, the workstation you're actually using to play back the music. The part that is still very strange for people to kind of get used to is, like, the process of getting all of those pieces in there and creating it. And we have these different building blocks. Programs and instruments are, like, the 2 basic types,
Mhm.
and, an instrument, like, pretty familiar to using a sampler, is a collection of audio and some kind of logic around how that audio is going to be used to fulfill musical instructions. Um, but we've created a bunch of different kinds of instruments, which I'll get into. And for programs, we have sort of at the hierarchy, like at the top level, we have something called a macro program, and then we have
Oh,
main
macro.
programs. Yeah, the macro program, I like to think of this because we started from the top with like, this has to be continuous music. It's not,
Mhm.
you have a lot of challenges when you know that you're going to switch it on, you're going to start, and then it's just going to be going and going and like changing all these different ways, but actually being nonstop. And the macro programs are kind of like dominoes in the sense that everyone goes from somewhere to somewhere else. And
Mhm.
they end up getting placed end to end by matching the part, so like we have this composition for lo-fi hip-hop where we just started off at the top, just dividing it into 75 bpm and 85 bpm, and there's all these different programs and instruments that work in those two tempos. But the macro programs basically just go, 75 to 85, stay at 85, 85 to 75, or stay at 75. And we got the whole composition done with just those four macro programs.
Oh, wow. So
So,
this shifts with the BPM at different points?
right, right. And, you can sort of let it run on its own and it's just going to randomly go back and forth between the two tempos. But you take that in the context of a video game or somewhere where you're actually using manual control. And that's kind of like just the foundation of like switching between those two tempos. Cause it's not just the tempo, like that's how the
Other things too.
composer,
Yeah, there's
right,
other
right.
pieces.
Producer, and this is Jamal Whitaker, that's my business partner that produced all of this, and he's a really experienced hip hop producer. And so those two tempos really, and it would be interesting to speak with him actually sometime also about this because he could really get into like the exact nuance of like those two tempos represent two slightly different styles of lo-fi hip hop.
Oh, yeah,
So
they just kinda weave between them. It's interesting, it's like there are ways, like, if you're mixing like a DJ, you can
yeah,
kinda cut into it. Like, in some cases, you can kinda morph. So I don't know if
right.
you have that level, but I have some samplers that can morph. Like this thing from Make Noise, it's called a morphogy. They
Mm,
can take like two different samples. They could be running at two different BPMs. They know how to morph them so they can be kind of happening at the same time and they kind of go into each other. And so then it's kind of like when a
interesting.
DJ goes from one track, one clip to the next, and then
Yeah.
it might be a different BPM or they could be kind of co-mingling at the same time. And so I wonder,
Uh,
do you have those kind of opportunities where you kind of morph at the same point in time and then switch, or does it kind of just fade into one or the other?
it's interesting. I mean, you have the option of like if you were making a composition, you have the option of like fading smoothly from one tempo to another.
Hmm.
But it's interesting. I'd say like at this moment in time, none of the projects that we put together have like overlapping elements of two different tempos at once. So I would say that
Yeah,
like, putting the tool
polyrhythms.
in your hands, yeah, you might.
Polyrhythms.
Well, at one
Well,
place, I guess,
polyrhythms are hard to deal with. We just you start getting into subharmonics and polyrhythms. It's like, yeah,
right.
those things can get a little complicated, and there's a lot of work to try to clean it up. But
One
it's kind of
interesting thing though, for one place where we did have polyrhythms for in the ambient music project in space, Ian Hersey like set the tempo really low. I think it was like 12 BPM or something like that. And that was just a theoretical framework that kind of
oh, to
goes at
see
these
what
long
could happen.
sections.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
then the actual instruments themselves are in fact at all of these different tempos, and it'll just be like sounds which, one loop over another at two different tempos, you actually end up with all of these different combinations over
yeah,
like a
yeah,
2 minute
yeah. You can play
segment.
with
Yeah.
I play with a lot of polyrhythms like that because I
Uh,
have multiple drum machines. One might be
okay.
going like 4/4, might be going 6/8, might be going 7,
Right.
and you can kind of have them because you have your mixer. You can like have them come in at different levels. It's
Yeah.
kind of like shadow vocals. Like when you
Yeah.
start to layer vocals, you might layer them in different pitches where you can start layering these polyrhythms and you could have something happen in like a kick drum once in a while or a
Yeah.
tom or something. So it could be on one drum machine just doing that. And then
Yeah.
another one's actually doing the cymbals and that could be going a lot faster. Or it could be doing the hi-hat or it could be doing some kind of electronic drum or African rhythms. And you can
Yeah.
start to play with things because if you think about like multi-track, that's how I talk about sound paintings. I talk
Mm,
about like the layer of a painter when they put the paint
mm,
down. I use my studio like the Beatles. The idea of the
mm,
sound painting came from George Martin and the Beatles,
hmm,
where they said, we could play like we did in Hamburg, or we can
mm.
take what I was doing with Peter Sellers on his comedy records and layer things, right? And that's kind of where
Uh,
it came from because he was actually doing these Peter Sellers albums,
oh, wow.
these comedy records that had all these layers. of
Mhm.
effects and clips and backward things. And Beale said, "Hey, we like those. Can we use that stuff?" And that's how it
Wow.
started to take those techniques that George Martin was already doing with
Wow.
Peter Sellers and then apply them to a rock band and then say, "Oh,
Wow.
wow, we can be like Monet and have all these layers."
Huh. No, and this I actually what's really piquing my interest here is like one to see what you would do with this with actually a platform in your hands because you'd be coming up with things we never thought of, and then two to really expand the amount that you can just do all this stuff live because right now the process of composing music and playing it back are very separate in our platform, which
Mhm.
makes sense if you're publishing a video game,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah. Yeah.
like everything else in video game development, you've got all this stuff that happens in the lab. And then by the time you get into playtesting, like you've built and shipped that game. But it would be really cool to, see what this was like with just like more of a live composition framework.
Yeah, I'd like to see what I could do with it. I like to play with tools. I mean, I use all
Cool.
kinds of tools that whatever's coming up, and I kind of hijack things. It's like, well, I can use this, and it's like
Mhm.
maybe it wasn't supposed to be used for that, and then I
Yeah.
do it anyway.
That's awesome,
You know,
man. Yeah.
but that's the way how you do things. That's how you
Yeah.
get something. It's like you got to blur things. I like to
Yeah.
mix things up, and it sounds like you got a cool tech that I would like to check out. So I was checking out before we started the interview. I said, "Well, this looks really interesting because like you got macros. I mean, we all kind of if we used things like Akai forces and stuff like that and DAWs, about macros at least from
Mhm.
the context of a DAW,
Right.
of the
Right.
context of a tool like that. But like in terms of you know grid life, and then
Yeah.
tracking." It's just interesting to see what you can do. You can bring different tools in. Like I like to bring my Eurorack stuff in and kind of bring it in to those worlds.
Mm. Yeah.
So I'd see like what happened if I bring that kind of stuff into that system and see what I could do with it.
Yeah, and you'd be sort of like thinking about almost like, just strips of tape, like, if you were, because you could have lots of different size sound clips, like we're really pretty open in terms
Mm,
of like not necessarily looping things. Other kinds of programs, we have some stuff that's more like traditional sample sequencing. So you can use a beat program, that's a type of program, and then you can have a drum instrument that, has a bunch of different drum sounds. And when XJ picks a beat program, it might pair it with like any one of number of different drum instruments, right?
mhm,
Actually, one of the like just little nuances was finding out that like just pairing kicks and snares is huge.
mhm.
So there are
Yeah,
certain things that you might randomize, but then we found over time that like even when we're randomizing which drum instrument gets assigned to a beat program, any pair of a kick and a snare is something that a human being decided on. Like these two things go together. And that
yeah,
that provides like a lot of ground,
yeah. There's a lot of
foundation.
groundwork when you can do that because I mean I'm always
Yeah.
going through all types of drum machines, from
Mhm.
analogs to like digital drums and just playing with what you can do. And polyrhythmic stuff is the stuff I like to get into with like a multiple drum machines running at
Wow.
once. But yeah, if you can play with like the different aspects of that, that would be really cool. And then the links, like some systems, like these
Yeah.
sample links, you're limited to like a certain size of your sample. But like when I
Mhm.
started, I kind of did a kind of cheat that 9 Inch Nails used to do, is they used to go out with their Tascam
Hmm.
and take whatever they had when they recorded the song, like the original material, and actually
Hmm.
then run it through tons of effects.
Oh
So they
yeah.
would be playing live, and then they'd have one of their guys actually have their Tascam and then feed that through a bunch of
Oh,
effect processors. And then instead of using like a DAW to play back the backing tracks, they're using their Tascam to play it back, and then running that through tons of effect processors, and then controlling
wow.
that mix through that. And then it gives you like this alternative kind of very experimental way of presenting your music. You could play it
Yeah.
straight and it's not run through effects, or just then suddenly run it through something and a space echo or through string reverb or through flanger or whatever,
Yeah.
different combinations, and it totally radically shifts it to something else. It's more live
Huh.
performance capability.
Yeah, especially, something like running sound through tape, right? You could just have a tape reel running and you have the write head, writing sound onto it, and then you're reading it off of the read head, and it's going to transform hugely and organically just on that
Yeah.
inch of tape.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
cool stuff. I mean, the Who used to run, Baba O'Reilly on tape. They used
Huh.
to run what they were running through their 2600, their ARP 2600, like, that whole passage was like an ARP that was
Wow.
running through, like, different parts of that synthesizer, and it was, it was hard to replicate that live, so they just run it on tape and play to the tape.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, yeah, so I mean, if you can take your Tascam or your old, reel to reel and then run it, digitize it, bring it in, or just bring the audio in, and then, like, so is there any particular length, like if you had something that's 3 minutes long, can you bring that in?
Yeah,
Or it's like
absolutely.
like 30, oh, you can do that.
Yeah,
That's
and
cool.
it was like early on, I think so, like when we were first developing it, some of the ideas that were on the board, and they're still there. Like we use, we just got this long, essentially an agile system for like keeping track of the project that's like running for
Mhm.
years now.
Oh,
But
agile
so
method,
every
yep.
idea gets written down, right? But like we're just gonna kick it farther down the road. Like we're only really small teams, so we're only working on like what we want to build right now. But there's ideas out there for like soft synthesizers, right? For live effects and more advanced compressors and all of this stuff.
Mhm,
And we
cool.
actually haven't built any of that because we kept coming back to just like let the producer decide whatever they want to use. And as long as it
Mhm.
ends up being a digital recording, like everything we're working with is digitally recorded, then we're just going to take that and play it back faithfully. And we're really just focusing on the timing and what gets selected and what gets combined at different times. Um,
So the output, once you finish a project, does the output go to like a WAV file or an MP3 or some other form, or does it stay within a proprietary format?
no, definitely. Right now, yeah, you can just write it out to a WAV file. The more and more we've just focused on live streaming, and like the more that we're focused on like video games in particular, it's like the playback engine is something that we want you to be able to take and embed inside of a video game.
Mhm.
Um, But
That's cool.
essentially, yeah, just output it there. And you could use this tool in a studio and then run the output of it through whatever you wanted and make it sound, even more interesting from there.
Yeah, so you could take it, like I have got, right now I'm using like a Zoom multi-track connected to my laptop
Right.
to do this podcast. So theoretically, anything that's on the USB input could actually come into my multi-track, and then I can overdub on top of it.
Yeah.
And then I've got my grandmother hooked up, my Moog hooked up to my whole thing. So I got
Yeah.
Moogs and Rolands and all kinds of stuff. So I like to multi-track stuff like outside of a DAW.
That's
I
cool.
actually go and punch
Yeah.
in and go live play a Moog bass line and play for 4 minutes live rather
Cool.
than
Yeah.
putting it into the grid. But that's because I know I can play. So if you even know how to play,
Yeah.
that seems natural. But if some people say, well, I'll just throw it on the grid.
Right. Right.
I'd
Right.
rather just go on the keys and play it.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
if I record it and I get it into that world, and then once it's there, I can manipulate it. But I just like, but sometimes I like to auto generate stuff too. Like I said, like LFOs or random voltage generators or other oscillators
Mm.
to drive something to give me an idea that I didn't know. I didn't know what like maybe I don't have an idea, so I let my
Mm.
machine tell me what I'm going to do.
Let the
So
ghost tell you, give
let
you an
the
idea.
ghost go run through an envelope, make it real
Yeah.
slow, and then it does all kinds of weird stuff. It's like, oh, I can use that. It's kind of like that
Yeah.
experimentation that Pete was doing on Baba O'Reilly, or like,
Mm.
who are you? Like what was he doing? He was experimenting with analog sense and coming up with these weird sounds and
Mm.
these weird passages. And it's like, oh, and I always liked the way Townsend approached it because he wasn't a keyboard player; he's a guitar
Mm.
player. Then he approached synthesizers in a way that Keith Emerson didn't, or Rick Wakeman
Interesting.
did. And so then
Wow.
sometimes it's cool to have somebody that's not their main instrument, so they approach it in a different way. Like I
Yeah.
need this to be
Yeah.
a different palette on my song. So Pete was looking for this other sound. He knows how to play guitar, but he wanted something different to
Mm.
make Baba O'Reilly. So that's kind of cool when you can do that.
An artist that just had a huge influence on me growing up, and I still love to this day, is Aphex Twin. And
Yeah, they're a good
this is a
band.
guy that like has just he built his own software in a lot of cases. Sometimes you're listening to the software make music. There's this album Drux, which just like completely blew my mind and changed the way that I thought about that interrelationship between instruments and computers and machines, where a lot of the sounds on Drux are actually like solenoid controlled. They're like robotically controlled instruments that he's recording in this studio environment. He's got sequences that are, setting off like everything from pianos to drums or whatever.
Kicking things off, triggering things.
Right.
Yeah.
But then he's taking those sounds, sampling them, and running them back through other processes that he came up with. And I mean, it just, you really can't, by the time it's done, separate the two at all.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to produce. Like you can resample. Like a lot of times I would like to resample instead of some vinyl, something coming off of my Moog. And
Yeah.
then, and then have that go and take the CV of my sample, and the rhythm of that sample will then drive another machine. And so
Mm,
then you take that and then have that drive a bass synth. So go
mm.
have a drive like a mini Moog, and then run it through the CV and have that drive. The mini Moog bass line is being driven by a sample rhythm.
Cool.
And then it all starts to sync, but it's different tones come from different places. Then you could interrupt it with like LFOs or other things and have it run stop run stuff. But the CV gives you
Uh,
this a lot of opportunities with the physical CV
mm,
wires. I love to kind of just override everything with
mm.
these different combinations, then just rip everything out and start again.
And I mean, your music really sounds alive. Like there's something that I really appreciate. Like, come back to avant-garde, and even in filmmaking, I've loved avant-garde films for a lot of the same reason, where you just throw all the rules out and come up with things where you almost like as the listener, it's like arresting your attention. It's controlling you a lot less than, say, like pop music or
Yeah.
Hollywood movies. And it leaves a lot of room for you as the listener to bring your own thoughts and your observations and like have this actual life experience while the music's playing.
Well, I think what I love about like talking to people like you that are pushing the envelope and coming up with new tools is like in the musicians, if we live in the streaming world, we have declining benefits from that other than it's kind of like advertising. But
Right.
we need other ways to monetize our music. So being able to use a tool like yours, that tool to get into the world of film and video games, because that's where you have to sync license. It's only kind of the
Mm,
game in town for a lot of us today because they've really taken like the value and
mm,
devalued ever since Napster and all these other things
yeah.
happened. Like the value of a song, is
Hmm.
like less than a penny,
Oh, so
per
much
stream.
less than a penny,
Yeah,
if
and
you're familiar. Yeah.
yeah, and you're like, well,
Scary.
my podcast gets more money than that.
Mm,
It's like, well,
interesting.
how is that fair for me? And I'm a musician, so I go, how is it fair that my song royalty is so inconsiderate, so much smaller than my podcast episode
Yeah.
royalty? But that's just
Yeah.
like it's like the devaluation. So tools that can help bring some value back to your music, and maybe we can talk about
Mhm,
like, okay, so if you use this tool, how do you get this in front of the people who do the video games? Do you have
mm.
like a pipeline or something, or a funnel to it, or you just have a way that once you set it up in this format is more likely to get picked up?
I mean, a lot of that right now is exactly where we're focusing our energy, and definitely some question marks there. We're focusing on integrating with a couple like big known platforms. So you've got Unity, this big game engine. Unreal is also a big game
Oh yeah,
engine.
that's a big engine.
Um, and there are big communities around this, and a lot of people building games in it. So we're working on integrations, basically just porting the code from the player component over so that it can run inside of a Unity game, so that it can run inside of an
Oh,
Unreal game.
that makes it a lot easier. It's like you
Yeah,
made it, yeah. If you make it easier, so you don't have to go through hoops, you're more likely to get adopted.
hopefully, right. And talking to people, like, we were actually at this Unity Developer Day in San Francisco last week, and there's a lot of Unity developers there, and some of the music producers, the actual like music directors and people that are like working with the developers and coming up with really creative music. And those are the people that had the most like head nods when we're talking about what we're doing. And and just really excited to have like the Unity integration will be the first one that's done. Really excited to have that, because then like the whole audience of people that are making games in Unity, making music for games in Unity, then it becomes an option for any of them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely gotta check this out. And if you ever need beta testers for
Yeah.
stuff, I,
Oh,
I've, I've,
absolutely.
I've beta tested like stuff on SoundCloud, and for them, I actually did some stuff for them. But
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
it's interesting. The integration between like multiple art forms. A
Mhm.
lot of times with musicians, we tend to work with filmmakers. We work with people doing digital,
Yeah,
visual stuff. Because if you go do a show, like you want to have something like on the screen. So a lot of
yeah,
times you do these animations, or you use like film directors or people creating like, like the light shows back in the day, or
right.
Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd used to have these big shows like when they would do the wall.
Oh, yeah, and
They
the
would have
oil
these,
wheel, that classic,
yeah,
like yeah, I
yeah, or
actually saw
even
there's a guy, what's his name? Brian Sweeney, I think he does this, show called Ambient Church that's in, different cities at different times, actually. I saw them in Brooklyn a few years back, and, they're actually in a church with, I'm blanking the name of the artist, was like just this legendary kind of original ambient music producer. It was like all Moogs on stage, and just these analog synthesizers and just all the wires, everything that you're talking about. And then the light show that went with it, they had brought in this artist that was doing the original, like it's like a, I don't even know, it's a projector with all these different kinds of
projector.
oils.
Oh, kind of like what Andy Warhol must have been doing with the like thing he used to do with the Velvets. Like he used to do these
Mm,
happenings, and they used to have these things
mm,
going on a film. Maybe they would run things on
right,
projectors. Probably
right.
wasn't advanced as what that was in 66, 67, so it wouldn't have been what it is now. But
But they
but
were deliberately they were bringing some of the original technology, and it was like it was beautiful to see because we're so inundated with digital stuff and
yeah,
digital processes that it's just like the incredible variations that they're coming up with by just dropping paint and dropping oil into water and projecting that on a
yeah,
screen.
some of the old school stuff, like Zappa used to do with the Mothers of Invention. They
Mm,
used to do these happenings, and they'd have artists like that. They'd be doing stuff like you're talking about. They would kind
cool.
of do that San Francisco mentality, is like, well, we're all artists, and we're gonna have
Yeah.
like actors on stage, models on stage, and then artists actually projecting pieces of art.
Yeah.
In real time, guys doing stuff real time, like painters doing stuff and then projecting it in real time.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of I think there are a lot of artists who would be into that, to create these kind
Mhm.
of modern happenings. Take old tech and new tech. So I've
Yeah.
always been like, yeah, I mean, I use my Moogs, but then I use my Akai stuff. It's like I use whatever serves the song. So at the
Mhm.
moment, if my song needs to be like all analog, it's all analog. But if I need to use a sampler and some digital stuff and some soft synths, I'll use it because whatever serves
Yeah.
that moment.
Yeah.
It's like whatever that piece is gonna be, and I don't know. Like, when I start, it's like, "Oh,
No.
yeah, this piece needs something," then I'll use something more modern. If a piece is like, "No, it needs something older," then I'll use, the older stuff.
Yeah. That's cool. Because yeah, I would really love to hear what if somebody took XJ music and used it as like just the foundation of a live show where you figure out some part of the music that you want and put that in there, and then have that running and have somebody manipulating that workstation live while playing other instruments on top of it. And the workstation actually displays like this sheet music sliding by as it's going.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's telling you like that's kind of the screenshot that you see. We've
Just
got
tell
a
you what keys and stuff
video
it's
demo.
in. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
and so you could, as a musician, like you could play along with that. It's giving
Yeah,
you
yeah.
all the cues that you need.
Yeah, and I play by ear too, so, I mean, a lot of it I
Oh,
would hear and kinda play with it, kinda like a fusion musician. But, like, yeah,
that's cool.
knowing what key it's in and what it's doing, that's helpful. Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, I like to do Facebook events live. Like I
Wow.
used to do it more, but I would actually, with all this stuff behind me,
Yeah.
I have all these like multiple webcams, and then go and use some Streamlabs tools, OBS, and have
Mhm.
multiple camera angle show where I would
Love
actually
that.
be playing my Moogs and stuff, just right for an hour, just play something live. And if
Sweet.
if I could connect with this type of system, HA Music, and then have something where I live jam with XJ Music, create some piece and then
Oh, hell
live
yeah.
jam with it and put it up. Yeah, I'd be into
Definitely.
trying to. I worked something out before I did it, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, it's just something that sounds cool. Because I mean, I'm kind of like a in the moment kind of stream of consciousness flow state guy. So like,
So
yeah, if
cool.
I can do
Yeah.
something like that, I would try it.
Yeah. And we'd really appreciate like the feedback from your standpoint as being, like you said, just flow state, like live musician, kind of where does the tool need, where is it
Yeah.
holding you back, right? Like what
Yeah,
could be
yeah.
improved?
What could you do to make it like more integrative? To
Yeah.
figure out how to link it. Like as if I
Mhm.
could, kind of my stuff, and like I do a lot of CV, I do a lot of MIDI, you
Mm.
know, I got the new USB-C MIDI, so if there's a way to kind
Right.
of USB-C it to link it to some of my stuff, to
Mhm.
link it to my clocks, and
Yeah.
then have my MIDI clock or my CV clocks, like, actually helping to trigger stuff or being able to connect so it could trigger stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a connection. So the having that MIDI, a MIDI CV like, there's a lot of
Yeah.
digital MIDI CV converters that will even link to like soft synth engines. Like, you could
Huh.
go into Pro Tools and have a CV clock kicking something off. If you could
Yeah.
do something like that, and then also have the MIDI and then even virtual CV to trigger tones or patterns,
Yeah.
that would be cool. Then you could have a thing driving a pattern and then using one of your soft synths to drive like one of my Moog
Yeah.
sequence. I got a 250 step sequence around a grandmother. It's an
Sick.
analog sequencer. I can set it and then have
Uh,
that drive one of your instruments.
yeah, I mean, I gotta write that one down right now, actually. It's funny because 'cause we've been so focused, on just, like, certain lanes that, like, that hasn't come up yet. I wonder if that's even, like, in our roadmap. But
Yeah.
yeah, to be able to send out a clock
User
signal, to be
story,
able to
use case.
yeah, exactly, user wants to write programs that send out MIDI signals, like, there it is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm just
Yeah,
I love doing CV and MIDI signals and that kind of MIDI information to trigger things and then see what it does. On a different
yeah,
instrument. Use a Prophet 5 versus a grand, a mini Moog versus an Oberheim. Like, what
mm,
does it sound like if I send that signal? It's like, oh, okay. Well, I like the Oberheim sounds better for this, so I'll use that. You
cool.
just make choices based on, okay, I like the tone for this particular piece. And so
Yeah,
you have different, tones or like the painting. It's like, it's the color. I
yeah.
see kind of like a synesthesia type of thing. It's like I see sounds in
Huh.
color and I
Oh,
kind of
wow.
think of it in that way. And so when I hear something, I kind of know if it fits the overall vision I have for something. And
Cool.
just having different palettes and having your palette, like if you have all these different instruments or drums that I could use, and say, whoa, I could use these tones are cool. I don't have that
Mm,
in my library. So maybe I can use these toms,
yeah,
these the snares or whatever, and figure out how I can
yeah.
integrate that with something I'm doing. It just gives me another source of a tool to use for sound creation.
It just reminded me, but like the absolute first prototype version of XJ Music, when I had sort of come up with the general idea and I wanted to just prove that it could work at all before dragging other people into it and really building software, I took a little Zoom recorder, went into my kitchen, took like a wooden spoon and just
Mm,
hit like
dang,
every
right?
single different thing, in the kitchen and recorded it. And used that as his first sequencer, or as a
Oh,
set of
cool.
sounds for the sequence, and it ended
Yeah,
up
field
sounding
recordings.
really cool. Yeah, it was like
Cool.
because it's randomizing it. There was like some part of it. I think I had an 808 kick drum that was at the
Mhm.
base of it, just to kind of like to have
Hold it
some
together.
foundation. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But then everything else was random, and I played it for a friend, and he was just like 30 minutes into this, just like the sound of all these pots and pans getting hit. He was like, "Dude,
Mhm.
this is incredible. It's different every time." Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's like field recording, like you record somebody turning the pages of a book, right?
Mm,
You record, like, tearing a piece of paper. Like, a lot of
yeah.
times, and, when we sample, I like to sample, like, field recordings. Like, go out to I live in New Hampshire, go out and record the
Mm,
Merrimack River and
uh,
actually use that instead of grabbing something. They actually took a recording of the Merrimack River and put it into the recording. Kind of like
yeah.
Yes, like Close to the Edge. They went out into a forest and they
Huh.
recorded the forest, and that whole album starts with the recording of the forest. So
Yeah.
I'm a kind of Peter Gabriel guy. I
Oh,
like that
yeah.
kind of
All
art
this is
rock.
amazing.
It's
Genesis
like
is amazing.
go and do the old school
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, just talk about humanity, like, being preserved, because I believe in that. Like, I wanna be able to, like, feel like somebody's actually in the room, and, like,
Yeah.
it's challenging in some way?
Yeah, well, it's like sometimes it's like, that variability. Like, if you think about Peter Gabriel's voice where he kind of pitches it in these kind of weird tones. They're
Uh,
that's really different. It's like he was into that art progressive rock, and then he finally got the
mm,
world to
mm,
align with his vision.
mm,
But he had that vision going back. to the early Genesis stuff. He was doing those types of things that people
Uh,
weren't connected. And then finally
interesting.
the world connected and actually, oh, that's cool. It's like, well, it took you that long to figure out it was cool.
Now we get it. Yeah.
Yeah, you just never know when you're gonna hit because it's just yeah, you never know. It's like that's why you kind of throw it at the wall. I'm kind of a throw it at the wall guy.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what's gonna work. And as a musician, sometimes you don't know what's gonna
Yeah.
work. So you can keep all the stuff to yourself or you can kind of throw it out. And then you find an audience and you find people that want to work with you. A
Mhm.
lot of opportunities I've had is just throwing things out, and then other musicians have said, "Oh, I want to work with you on
Mhm.
something." And then I got an opportunity. And I might not be the biggest guy in the world, but I get to work on something because somebody liked what I was doing. And that's kind of like the
Yeah.
point. And I get to work with other people because they say, "Oh, they
Yeah.
dig what I was doing," and I get to try something out. And I didn't expect that, but I wouldn't have known about it if I hadn't have thrown it out on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's totally different than just being alone, in the lab working by yourself. And even, what got me inspired to just try and jump out and get on people's podcasts and talk to people. You got to get out there in the world and just like put your idea out, see what other people think about it, what they might do with it.
Yeah, the podcast is a really cool form because I mean I've been doing it like I said since 2016, but we did it to get emerging artists and creative thinkers and people that have long discussions that aren't just like 15 minutes or like 90 seconds sound
Hmm.
bites. We actually get into a story and tell people about something that they might want to get into. And I mean, XJ Music and what you're doing is an opportunity where to think differently. In
Hmm.
a world where everybody's talking about AI replace him. I've had people come on the show and say, "Oh, AI is going to replace all musicians." I'm like, "Really?
Yeah.
Really? That's how much you think about musicians?"
It's tough, right? And I think there was somebody that I spoke to recently said, they think that all these companies are just jealous of musicians, jealous of artists, like the stuff that they can't do themselves, and now they feel like, okay, well, we finally can do this now. It's like actually, you're still just sampling. Like you might be using a
Yeah,
neural network,
yeah, it's
and
just a
and
sample.
it's
Yeah,
just a sample. It's of just a very interesting
might
way of
be more
sampling it.
advanced. It might be getting close to the bomb squad where you can move stuff around and it seems or De La
Yeah,
Soul and it seems like very inventive, but it's not something like Coltrane. It's not Davis.
right,
It's not Sun Ra. It's not Hendrix. Right? It's
right,
not pushing it unless somebody goes and takes it and puts that human spin and then reprocesses it through a different thing, right?
yeah,
Then the human being takes it and then adds another layer to it. Then that becomes something. But you just
yeah,
take what it gives you. It's just reprocess something from somewhere, and maybe you didn't hear it, but it did exist.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like it's just reprocessed phrases and prompts from different things.
Yeah, well, it's going to be really interesting to see where all this goes, and I really hope to. I just want like listeners, audiences, people out in the public to be, aware that it's not magic. There's language models and AI are not actually coming up with things that didn't exist before. It's like a really fancy kind of plagiarism where you can't quite connect it back to the source.
Yeah, and a lot of artists like ourselves, like a lot of artists, they're trying to create the digital rights management that
Mhm.
see, if we find that that phrase matches exactly what I did, then we're going and saying it's just like sampling. You got to clear it.
Yeah,
So I think that's the next step where that type of stuff is going because sampling
mhm.
it was the Wild West before you had to clear them, but
Right,
now you have to clear them. You got to pay for them. But you can't
right.
just do it, or you'll get a cease and desist, and you got to give me the royalties.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think the same thing's going to happen if people think it's original and then digital rights management gets developed. It's going to say, well, no, that's not really original. That comes from this piece, this
hmm
phrase, this part of the thing. And like you didn't get clearance for that. You need clearance.
yeah,
The concept of tech sometimes goes ahead of the management
right,
of the tech. Just because you
right.
can doesn't mean samplers let you do it. And then eventually the law caught
Yeah.
up and said, no, you can't do it.
Yeah, and that's every step of the way with technology going back to the beginning of the industrial age, right? Um, even just like factories, like not having regulated working hours, like
Yeah.
every single step of the way, people innovating, building technology are going to get away with whatever they can get away with until the society reels them back in.
Yeah, and it says eventually, "Oh, that's a no-go. You can't do
Yeah,
that," because it's like, you can't take stuff and not pay the copyright holder or the patent holder. That's just like, I think that's gonna be, if that Wild West becomes the law, then there's no law.
Yeah, it's true.
You know,
That's
it's a
probably right.
wilderness. It's the Wild West. It's like, you want it to be the Wild West. It's like, well, who's the sheriff?
Yeah, we need the AI sheriff, man.
The
Be
sheriff
bad.
coming in.
Yeah,
It's like somebody's got to do something. But I think it's really cool what you're doing with XJ Music. I think it's a really cool opportunity. I'm going to jump on checking this out like after I have some podcast tonight, but I will be checking this out in detail. And I really am serious about being a beta tester for anything you want to do.
yeah,
Because this is really kind of aligning where my head's at with stuff. I'm really into music tech and vintage and new stuff is like
yeah,
where my head's at. So definitely would want to jump on that. And I think people who have this kind of mindset, they're into expansive, different things, new ideas, new tools. I think you should check out xjmusic.com. And if you go to that site, I've been there, but you can tell people what happens when you go there, tell people what the experience is.
yeah, absolutely. You're really just going to be seeing some demos, some music that we published, and we're going to be trying to get. There's one video demo in particular that we've got coming up really soon that'll be up there. But you can sign up, create an account, mostly just reach out to us because right now, I mean, we're not charging anybody money for this. We really want to find out like what people are going to do with it. But it's an investment of time, like on your part as an artist. We really appreciate that and respect that. And we'll work with you. Like anybody comes, just say what's up, and we'll get to know you, find out what you want to do, and give you access to the tools themselves, help you out every step of the way. That's where we're at right now.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always looking for some new venue or new tool. And yeah, this seems like something that's really gonna light a fire on my head. Just like
Cool.
with whatever hair left I have, and get into it. But yeah, I wanted to thank you again for being on the show because I think this has been a really cool with synergy. Because I started this thing with music, back in 2016. We kind
Yeah,
of got beyond music, but this episode is kind of aligning into my original intentions, and so that's really cool.
tight.
Once in a while we get to go back and still focus on music, and in this is music tech and capabilities that I think a lot of creative people will be if they want to dive into it, check it out.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Pleasure meeting you, Phantom. Great to be on here.
Thank you. Again, this will be on all the podcast platforms that people are comfortable with. You can watch or listen by tomorrow. We've been live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. Those are the video channels. We also are on Spotify video podcast. That'll be later tonight, and we'll give everybody the landing page, and they can check it out however they want to.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Night.